All right, we're back with another video, and this video is going to be just a little thought experiment, I guess. And this thought experiment is going to be coming from some metaphysical stuff, some stuff from texts. I'll sort of be making the relevant references as I go along. But this experiment is going to be basically, am I dreaming myself? Now, what do I mean by am I dreaming myself? Do I mean that all of nature is, real or unreal? Well, you can have arguments that, detail that the universe is an actual reality. We feel things, even though things are constantly in flux. We're still able to feel them. We're still able to feel the effects of things. So somebody can argue reality is real based on that point. But then some people sort of attribute, this flux being an example of unreality because, everything's constantly changing, nothing stays stable. And, even if we do feel, effects on our bodies, do we believe these effects to be real? You know what I'm saying? It's kind of like with schizophrenia. What's out there, it might feel real, it might be sensed as real, but it's not actually out there. But, in either case, with dreaming, we could go down that route, but the route that I think would be a lot more beneficial is when it comes to the thought experiment of am I dreaming myself, is looking at the function of dreams and seeing if life fulfills the functioning of dreams. So what are dreams? Well, dreams, we can go down the Freudian route. Freud believed that, dreams, they're wish fulfillments. Dreams also have a capacity to illustrate functionings of the body. Like in one of his examples that he used in the interpretation of dreams, he sort of gave the example of like this dude who was dreaming of a chimney. And, he was dreaming of the chimney because he had heart problems. So, for Sigmund, it's really literal. It's a lot more base than, you could say Jung. Jung would say, dreams are more so symbols that are playing out in your mind that have to be deciphered in order to more so give better insight into reality, right? Then you have Hillman. Hillman, in his book, Dreams in the Underworld, he talks about the fact that you really shouldn't even you don't even really need to decipher the dream symbols at all. You can just directly interact with the dreams and what the dream literally tells you is how it actually is. There's actually like a short clip on YouTube of him explaining that as well. But regardless, our dream reality has a connection to the reality outside of the dream. Not only does our dream reality have a connection outside of the dream, but when we look at the structure of the dream is entirely us. Right? The dream, like, we understand that all of this stuff is coming from our mind, and it's all coming from our mind, and we still have the mechanisms of self within our dreams, because a lot of times we have the point of view that we have now, seeing through two eyes or whatever within our dreams. So everything is us when we're inside of our dreams. And all of these things are us, and we're seeing all of these things from sort of a third person perspective in order to gain information about ourselves, so that when we exit out of the dream, we're more equipped for reality, right? So that's the mechanisms and that's the structure of the dream, or at least my theory behind the structure of the dream. I'm gonna be a little bit more liberal, a little bit more honest. That's my structure of how I think dreams are. So let's look at reality, right? So when we look at reality, all of everything is matter, right? Everything is essentially matter, with varying vibrations, made of varying materials and placed into varying forms. But, we all understand that all of this stuff is matter. It's all one thing, just made to look differently. And not only is it all matter, but with that statement, that includes us. We are this matter as well. But we are matter, with a consciousness, which you could say is also matter. But the thing with a consciousness is that we're aware of things. So we are aware of, what we are, how physics plays, in relation to us, how genetics is, related to us. We have an awareness of our position in the universe. And, when you look at Kabbalah, I guess the more so closest thing that you can conceptualize of, what the phrase really technically within Kabbalah, Hesed would be matter, honestly, within Kabbalah, because Hesed would be the Big Bang, and Kether would be like, I guess you can say, Kether is God, so I guess you could say Kether is essentially like a nothingness, like a pure nothingness. But, Hesed would be, the matter that we're all comprised of. And, you go into Gavira, and, things start being put into forms, and, it starts getting colored and stuff once you get into, Netzah and Had and all that sorts of jazz. But, safe to say, what I'm trying to illustrate here is that we understand that even though we have individual consciousnesses, we're all made of one substance. Just how within a dream, even though, I'm experiencing the dream, even though I'm experiencing the dream as Jalen, or I'm experiencing the dream as like a singular dream figure, I know that I'm still made of the same substance as the other dream figures, which that substance being, my own psyche that is having the dream. My own psyche is creating this dream, and it's allowing me to experience the dream that it created by giving me a singular point of view, right? So that's how dreams are. That's how, reality is, of us being matter, us having consciousnesses, us being individuals. And not only that, but, our lives sort of reveal things about, our lives sort of give hints about who we actually are, quote unquote, and we can never really pinpoint who we actually are, but we just have an intuitive knowing about who we actually are when we experience these things. Like y'all know I'm a Jung head, so, the closest thing for me would be projections. We see something outside ourselves, and, it entices us. And, we have to understand that that thing that is enticing us is really just an energy within ourselves that is being represented by that thing. And we sort of have to reclaim that energy for ourselves. So, for one person, it might be music. So maybe you understand that, music is very interesting for you. So maybe you learn an instrument, or you get a music collection, right? You have the anima and the animus. So for that, it would be like relationships. So you realize that you're attracted to the same type of woman or man, but down the road, you realize that it's really certain qualities that these women and men have that you're envious of, or that find quite virtuous. And so, maybe, even though you still love the person, you also try and develop those qualities within yourself. And um, through doing that, you also are able to demystify the other person and see the other person as, a whole being within themselves. And you're able to love them a little bit more better. But that's a whole nother video. Let's get back to dreaming ourselves. So the question remains is that when we look at life, it has sort of similar functionings to the dream. When we go into a dream, we encounter things that are ourselves and that remind us of ourselves. And, when we exit out of life, the dream helps us. When we're inside of life, we go through things, that remind us of ourselves and, sort of remind us of who we really are. And it helps us out. But the question is that, of course, we gain a better knowledge of traversing life. And, when it comes down to dreams, there's certain times where, you'll have a dream and the adventures that you had in that dream might continue on to another, night where you have a segment of dreams that continues from the dreams you had previously. But, back to the question, when it comes down to life though, what are the lessons that we're learning pertaining to life? What are they doing for us when it comes to a hereafter? Now, of course, we don't know what the hereafter is. Nobody has been able to come back and tell us what comes after death. It's dang near impossible. And for the people that do, the information, is always obtuse, and it always goes, in many different directions. Of course, you have the Christians that give hell testimonies. You have the people that give reincarnation testimonies. Like there was one, I think, with like a girl or whatever, where she was talking about the fact that, she's been reincarnated and, she pinpointed like her murder or whatever. Like, I don't know if that story is true or false, but, I've heard of it before. But, all of these stories differ, and we don't know which one is true or false. All we know is that, what we are now cannot be created nor destroyed, obviously. So what we are now, it's going to transform into something. Of course, our biological, like all this biology, all this flesh and stuff, it's going to go into the ground and it's going to feed other things. But what are the other parts of ourselves? Where are they going to go? If we have souls, where do our souls go? If our consciousness is something differing from just our bodies, if our consciousness extends outside of our bodies, or it has an element that isn't just our bodies, where does it go? If I am dreaming myself, like with all the experiences that I've had in life, once I wake up, after death, what type of benefit will I gain from my earthly existence? It's just very, it's very interesting, right? And I was looking at some Black Myth Wukong gameplay. Like I was just looking at this dude on YouTube defeat all the bosses. And, even though that might seem unrelated, the story of Black Myth Wukong is essentially that Sun Wukong, he allowed Erlang Shen to defeat him. And the reason he did this was so that he can get rid of the circlet on his head that pretty much makes it to where he's controlled by the gods, right? So he's sick of being controlled by the gods. He's sick of, having to defeat his friends, the other Yao Guais, and all that sorts of stuff. So he wants to free himself. But in order to free himself, he has to more so get rid of the body that the circlet is attached to. So he lets Erlang Shen, kill him or whatever. But he can't really die. So, his body becomes fragmented. And all of these different Yao Guai kings or whatever have pieces of his body. And throughout the game, he defeats the kings, and he regains parts of his body. And also throughout the game, he encounters people that he met on the journey to the west. But of course, he doesn't really remember these people like that because he's in a newly, he's reincarnated. He's not even though he's Wukong, he's not the same Wukong. He's a reincarnated Wukong. He's the destined one. So at the end, when he's about to face off against essentially the corpse of his former self, the old monkey is pretty much telling, hopefully I don't butcher the pig dude's name, Zubaje. I'm sorry, y'all. I'm not very versed in, freaking Chinese. I'm not versed in Chinese, but anyways, the old monkey tells him this is not the same Wukong. That Wukong has been long gone. But what this, I'm just summarizing, but what this Wukong does is still meaningful. And what this Wukong does can still, be called a journey to the west. It could still, he could still do great things. And, the story ends with him regaining all of, his relics, all the parts of his body, like I said, defeating his former self. And, he doesn't have the circlet on his head anymore. So he's not a slave to the gods anymore. But the reason why I say all that is because with that, I don't know if I could say that's an analogy or not, but me connecting that to this is just to say what I'm learning as Jalen. How does it relate to what that's gonna do once I'm gone? Of course, one might say, well, all the things that you've done now will impact those around you, and after you die, you'll live on that way. That's sort of kind of something similar to what the Vikings thought. But when it comes down to me as an entity, I guess you could say within the reality, what does my reality now mean for me once I die, And, the problem with death is that you can never really know. Like I said, with the things that, I stated where it's matter can't be created nor destroyed, and, all these talks about energy and all that sorts of stuff. While that is true, we don't know what that means for us when we die. It could just be darkness, but it could also not be darkness. We really don't know. That's why I'm so agnostic. It's because, it's just there's so many questions that I don't really know. But I still thought that this was a very interesting thought experiment. Are we dreaming ourselves? With occultism, you have the higher self. Are we, if our dream selves are, external incarnations meant to help us better understand our real lives, are our real selves external incarnations of our higher selves that can help us better understand, ourselves after we die or whatever, But anyways, like I said, this was an experiment, so a little theory. So I'm not saying that this is true or false. It's just a little fun little video. But anyways, it's your boy signing out. Peace.